So let's talk about lake personalities because a lot of different ecosystems will grow big perch. Okay, um, something that's not that far from here that comes to mind is like the backwaters of the Mississippi River. Huge perch on the Mississippi River, the backwaters. That's one ecosystem that grows big perch. You look at where I'm at out in the Dakotas, we get these dish bowl prairie lakes. Okay, they can grow really big perch. You know, whether it's northeastern South Dakota or on that Wabae, Bitter Lake area, up where I'm at in Devil's Lake, or some of these, even some of these prairie lakes around Jamestown, Valley City. These dish bowl prairie lakes are notorious for growing big fish. Now, the thing about this is that in a lot of cases, these fisheries that are really driven on invertebrates, especially when these fish grow really fast, a lot of times these fish have fairly short lifespans. Okay, whereas you look at like Lake Aggievik and the UP of Michigan, big perch, you catch 13, 14, 15-inch fish out there. Those fish have a lot longer lifespans. Great Lakes fish seem to live a lot longer. Fish on Cascade seem to live a lot longer. And that's kind of the biology, is that you get certain situations where fish grow fast, they don't live as long. There's other areas where the fish maybe grow a little slower, but they live a lot longer and they ultimately get big. Now, forage and fish densities have a lot to do with a lake's personality. One thing that I think can be a mistake is when you think of big perch, you think, oh, big perch, they're so aggressive and they're big and whatever. But a lot of times these big fish, they've been eating invertebrates, freshwater shrimp, things that are easy to catch, and they've been eating on that bug menu their entire lives. They can be extremely temperamental, extremely fussy. Okay, and so don't always think that big perch are easy fish to catch as far as big lures, aggressive profiles. I find that usually the situations, the conditions, the environment that grows big fish will a lot of times sometimes create tough fishing situations. Does that make sense? You talk to a biologist, you know what a biologist's worst fear is? A lake where the fishing seems too good to be true. Where all kinds of big fish are just, everybody's catching all kinds of big fish. And they're catching them easy. They don't have to work very hard at it. Because what happens is that environment is stressing those fish out enough where those fish make you look really, really, really good. Okay? The environments that produce big fish are sometimes environments that can make you look bad, where you have fish that have all the food that they can ever eat, and they don't have to eat what you're using. Okay? And so densities and forage densities, fish densities have a big bearing as far as how you can attack some of these lakes. We'll go into some deeper details here. Natural lakes obviously have a lot of history and there's a lot of great fishing. I mean, it typically, as a rule of thumb, the bigger the lake, the bigger the fish, but not always. But you look at Mille Lacs, you look at Lake of the Woods, you look at these big lakes, big bodies of water just seem to grow big panfish. There's some pretty nice perch and some small lakes, like you get up by Squaw Lake and Winnebagosh up in that area. There's some small lakes that'll produce some big perch, but they can be a lot more fickle, right? Because word gets out, and those small lakes get cleaned out a lot quicker than a big lake. And so you kind of see these cycles. And that's the thing about perch to remember, is that perch are a very cyclic fish. In my opinion, yellow perch are one of the hardest fish to manage, okay? Bluegills are kind of easy, straightforward. The males guard the nest, the males pass on the genetics for the most part, as far as when they sexually mature, which ultimately determines their size, okay? And it takes up to 10 years for a 10-inch bluegill to grow. On some of these lakes, with the perch, for example, the perch only live 6, 7, 8 years. They're very shorter lifespan. And on top of that, you've got a very prolific fish that will overpopulate pretty quickly. And so what you see with perches, you just see these swings, booms and busts, booms and busts. I don't know if there's anything that you can do to get away from that. When you're riding the wave, when you're on the high part of the boom, enjoy it. I don't know if there's too much you can do to balance that out. And so perch are cyclic. You're going to have good fishing, and you're going to have memories, and you're going to have not so good fishing. Probably the biggest thing with perch is you have to be willing to travel. If your favorite memory, if your favorite fishery right down your road isn't booming at the time, go somewhere that is. Okay, there's just nothing you're going to do to combat that. Go to where the fish are. Obviously, there's some great perch fishing opportunities on some of the Great Lakes. Okay, and we're talking estuaries or bays, right? Even Schwamigan Bay, there's a history of perch up there. Green Bay, even down by Chicago, but any of the major bays, major rivers coming in, there's generally a population of perch. And talk about a fish that is completely different. I mean, if you've ever seen a 14-inch perch from, say, Green Bay, they've got a head like a smallmouth bass. Huge, huge heads. You know, they're used to eating shiners, they're used to eating crayfish. Completely looking different fish than what you see on say, one of the gosh or Mille Lacs. Okay, very, very big heads, big mouths, and some of that's just a forage. And obviously, there are some reservoirs that can create some great perch fish. Out in the Dakotas, we got a handful. You know, Lake Darling's kind of a long, shallow reservoir. Lake Ashtabula, probably the most notorious, well-known jumbo perch fishery on the planet right now is Cascade Lake out in Idaho. It's unbelievable the fish you catch out there. I mean, as far as you'll see, I mean, I don't want to, oversell it, but I mean, you could go out there and, catch, I don't know, maybe 30 to 60 fish per person a day. And of those fish, you're going to probably see at least, I would say on average, at least 4 fish over 1.5 pounds. And realistically, you have a really good chance of seeing a 2-pound fish every day. Okay, that's how crazy that can be. And if you've ever seen a 2-pound perch, that's a special fish. I mean, usually you're looking at about a 16-inch perch with great food. People talk about 2-pound perch, they talk about filling buckets full of them. Whale. A 2-pound perch is a special fish. They're not as common as what people think, but Cascade is probably one of the most well-known reservoirs. And that's a deal out there where you feel like you're walleye fishing. You're fishing the points, edges of the channels, flats, and breaking into the deeper structure or the deeper channels off the old river channel. Every once in a while, you'll catch a kokanee salmon or a trout. They have a fish out there, like an invasive fish called a pike minnow, which is about this big and it's got a big long snout on it. That they want you to kill every one that you catch. We catch a few rainbow trout. I've caught a few crappies, a few largemouth bass, of all things out there. But the perch fishing can be incredible. So you look at all these different environments, and go ahead and change it. You look at all these different environments, and you just see there's just all these different possibilities. You know, you got Great Lakes fisheries, you got reservoir fisheries, you got natural lakes, dish bowl lakes. Where do you start? Obviously, you want to recognize what lakes have big perch, okay? If you want to catch big perch, you got to fish lakes that have big perch. Now, what are some of my favorite locations? Obviously, your soft bottom basin is a slam dunk on almost every perch fishery, as far as there's going to be some fish in a soft basin. Now, that narrows it down, right? Because when you look at a map of a lot of lakes, there's a lot of soft basin, okay? That's usually, if you look at it, from a this proximity, you look at the basin, that's one of the biggest pieces of real estate on almost any lake, especially these dish bowl lakes. They drop down the shoreline, you just get this flat, soft basin. What I like to do is I like to focus on the edges, the transitions of those basins. If you have an inside turn, an out big long point, anything that can funnel those fish movements as they're swimming across that basin, I feel like you just put the odds in your favor that much more. Okay, but soft basins, especially on the dish bowl lakes, that's a big thing. A lot of your perch are going to be over that soft bottom. They're eating bugs. And I think even like with the freshwater shrimp, I think it's a deal where stuff just accumulates at the bottom of the lake. In a lot of these lakes, like especially these dish bowl lakes that are in the Dakotas, and you'll see some of these in southern, western Minnesota, the basin might only be 20 feet of water. Okay, soft bottom, 20 feet of water, that's where the fish end up. It can be an intimidating piece of real estate to try to find fish because it can be so big and so expansive, and there can be a randomness of where fish are. Now, in today's world, you can use forward-facing sonar to try to find fish, but what I find is in deeper water, especially like your Bitter Lakes, Devil's Lake, where you're dealing with over 30 feet of water, that depth of water, that soft of bottom, the fish don't show up that well. It's easy to miss fish. And so if you're going to go that route, don't get too fast and too aggressive, too cute with it, where you're just going to, don't look for too much, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. Sometimes you almost have to set up and wait, and you just see a couple little blips crawl across the screen. Those fish are really close to the bottom. You got to remember that doesn't have the separation that even 2D sonar does. Okay, the separation isn't that impressive on forward-facing sonar. And so on these basins, especially these perch are right on the bottom, you gotta wait a little bit, you'll see some fish moving. Okay, so slow down with it. Okay, and so a lot of times, instead of, it's not like necessarily like crappie fishing where you can just point the gun and see fish and then walk somebody over the top of the fish and drill in on them with a vex. Okay, when the fish are close to the bottom, fish over deep water, slow down with it. Don't look for as much because fish are going to get lost in the bottom. You'll see them come in and out of the bottom almost like worms. Anybody ever seen that? Okay, when you get fish that are right on the bottom, slow down with them. You can say the same thing for walleyes too. And so what I like to do is it's not so much pointing it and then seeing some fish and then walking over and drilling on top of them. A lot of times with these basin fish, especially when they're right on the bottom like that, is I'll just spin it 360 degrees. Do I have a lot of life around? And when I spin it one time, or when I see what I think is maybe 15 to 20 fish in an area, if I've got, say, 70, 80, 100 foot range, if there's some life, then I'll just fish and start to try to run traffic or make small moves. And so I'll use a forward-facing sonar to get an idea, is to try to get in the quadrants, the zone, the area where I know where there's fish. But when it comes time to drilling holes and moving and trying to catch them, you don't want to lug that heavy forward-facing sonar down. You don't want to lug that pole down. You don't want to have 2 feet of pole sticking below the ice with a transducer on it when you get a 14-inch perch running around and you still. Okay? And so we use the forward-facing sonar to find fish if it's appropriate, but we're still using the back sonar to catch it. Okay? And so don't get lulled into thinking that some of this new technology is going to change your fishing all that much. It really isn't. Okay? You need to still, it's like you're using side imaging and 2D on your boat. There's a time and place for all that. Learn how to manage it, learn what the advantages are, and then marry those things together. That'll make you a lot better angler. I'll use an example back home. I've been seeing fish, a lot of fish, in like say 7, 8 feet of water on these flats, these mud flats. Problem is I can't get near them. I can't get near any fish right now, to be honest with you. I'm dealing with 4 to 8 inches of ice. When I walk over to the fish swim away. You can watch it happen all day. Okay? Now, fish swim away. If I drill a hole where the fish were, thinking the fish maybe come back. If I'm over a flat, the fish don't come back. It's like I gotta wait forever. But if I see them on rocks, or if I can push those fish up along where there's some rocks, it's kind of a transition. I spook the fish as I walk up and drill a hole, but I sit there for 15 minutes and these fish come right back through there. Okay? And so I'm seeing fish in different places, but I'm catching them on these rock edges, these rock transitions, but it seems like there's something that will cause those fish to come back underneath me. Does that make sense? Once I get away from this rock edge, I've got an 8-foot flat that goes forever and it's just too random. I can't chase them down because they keep spooking. Okay? And that's something we're starting to understand really well, with early ice. So soft bottom basins are big. We touched on the reservoir structure like you find in a place like Cascade, which, again, Cascade, there's no walleyes. Okay, so the perch act like walleyes. They get over 2 pounds, and you basically fish them like walleyes. So any type of a point, any type of structure that intersects that old river channel is where you're finding them. Some of the smaller reservoirs, don't be afraid to look in the river channel itself. I can think of some small, long, narrow reservoirs in southern Manitoba, Canada, North Dakota, South Dakota, where we're finding most of the fish in the old river channel. Old river channel might be 12 feet of water, most of the reservoirs 6, 7 feet of water. Focus on that old river channel. And obviously, there's something about sand on natural lakes. Okay, doesn't matter if you're on Winnebago, if you're on Mille Lacs, basically Indian Lake, Clear Lake. I mean, it seems like perch love sand, and they love that sand-weed mix. And obviously, your weed profile is going to be important. Okay, what I find for the most part is that perch love to swim, they love to move. It's like they're always on the move. I always joke that perch have attention deficit disorder. Okay, if you catch a fish and if you're out of the water, those 6 fish that were with it are going to leave fairly quickly. Okay, they do not like to stick around. They're moving all the time. Okay, sometimes you'll find fish in perch and weeds where those fish will live in weeds like any other fish. They'll live in weeds just like a bass will. Okay, but I find that a couple things to keep an eye on. The weed profile is important. Okay, you got to have good weeds. Usually it's a mix of weeds, like I've caught a lot of perch and like that coontail, milfoil, pondweed, cabbage. Those 4 weeds, especially if you have a mix of different weeds together, seem to hold a lot of perch, but probably the biggest thing that changes one lake from the next is your predator profile. Okay, if you have a bunch of muskies and pike and largemouth bass and walleyes in a lake, sometimes the predators will keep those fish out of the weeds or out of that shallow structure. And we see the same thing up in the Dakotas where we've got a lot of trees and flooded brush and terrestrial vegetation that's flooded. Whereas those perch, if there's not a lot of predators, those perch they'll own those weed beds and they'll be up in that timber. If there's a lot of predators, you won't see that as much. It's almost like the predators will sometimes push the fish out of those spots, where I think sometimes what happens is those fish end up in the basins, not just because there's food there, but because they're a lot harder to catch. If there's 6 perch swimming together, they've been getting chased around their entire lives. They're a lot harder to track down and gun down when they're out over a big mud flat where they can see around them for a long ways. And so just a couple of things to consider. Predator dynamics can be a big thing with all panfish. It definitely has a bearing on how panfish act, especially perch. But you see it with bluegills, you see it with crappies. If you have a lake that's got big crappies in it, for example, and there's hardly any bass, those fish will act completely different than the lake 5 miles down the road. It's very, very similar if you look at a map, but there's a bunch of big bass or pike that are pushing and moving those fish around as far as how they relate to the cover. Okay, and sometimes we'll find perch on offshore rock, which I tell you what, if there's one thing that's underrated with people that are fishing for crappies, bluegills, or big perch, it's how good some of these deep rock spots can be. I think a lot of it's beaten into our head that fish deep rocks for walleyes. Walleyes love deep rocks, but I tell you what, if you have boulders or rocks in a soft bottom, they can be dynamite spots for bluegills, crappies, and perch. Okay, so rocks, especially round rocks that are say maybe this big or smaller in mud, a lot of times we'll catch big perch on those type of locations. I don't know if it's just a cover thing, where you've got the mud rock together and the mud provides the bugs that the fish eat, and the rock provides a cover where they can just feel safe. I'm not sure, but if you find big rocks, you go ahead and turn. If you find big rocks over mud, you're going to find big fish. Now, here's something really important. The shape of the mouth really tells you everything you need to know. If you were to look at a fish on Green Bay, they've got a big, massive head and a massive mouth. You can lip it like a bass. Like if you take a 13-inch perch, you can lip it like a smallmouth bass. They've got a mouth, a head like a bass. If you take a fish, say from the Dakotas that are on one of these sloughs, you can take a 14-inch perch, and that mouth is about the size of a Coke bottle. That's how much smaller it is. Small heads, small mouths. It seems like perch, and I don't know if it's a growth rate thing or whatever it is, but when you have perch that are eating a lot of freshwater shrimp and a lot of invertebrates, bloodworms, midges, bugs, they have very small heads and very small mouths. They're not nearly as aggressive. Think about that. You got a fish, you got a huge fat perch that's got a tiny little mouth. They might have a hard time gunning down a 3.5-inch flutter scoop. Okay, physically, I mean, it's a tough task. They're a lot trickier to catch. They take a lot more finesse. They want a lot smaller presentation. They've lived their entire lives eating an insect or an invertebrate, a bug, that has no eyes and no evasive maneuvers. These freshwater shrimp don't even try to swim away from it. They swim in a straight line. They either swim towards the light or away from the light. It's the easiest meal in the world if you're a fish. And so these fish have small mouths. They require a little bit of finesse as a rule of thumb. You get out on the Great Lakes, you get out in some of these areas where these fish are eating minnows and crayfish, for example, you'll see fish with a completely different build. They can still be big, but they're going to have really big mouths and really big jaws. And so that's the number one thing when you're trying to break down a fishery, you just size it up. What do I got to do to capture this fishery? Look at the fish. If there's fish mounted in a bait shop, there's pictures, whatever it is, look at the fish and see what you're dealing with. Big mouths, big heads. A lot of times these fish are just going to be a lot more aggressive by default. Small mouths, small heads can require much smaller profiles, much more finesse, much less aggressiveness. I'll give you some examples. Saginaw Bay, Lake Huron. These Great Lakes fish, as a rule of thumb, have that kind of run that big mouth, big head profile. You might be fishing 5, 6, 7 feet of water over sand, And no kidding, you're using a single hook flutter spoon. They call them bead spoons out there that might be this big with no bait on it, and you're doing a 3-foot stroke. Okay, and the fish are really, really aggressive. Why? They're Great Lakes fish. They've been first of all, they're used to being chased by something their entire lives. Okay, something always bigger is trying to eat them. But the other thing is they don't mess around. Okay, they're chasing shiners around. There's a lot of competition. A lot of times these schools can be big. Okay, whereas if you look at, like, say, a fish on Bitter Lake in South Dakota or Wabae Lake that's been eating freshwater shrimp, you can use one of those bead spoons for weeks and never catch a fish. Because the fish aren't just unaggressive enough to have that of an ecosystem. Does that make sense? Some of it is the shape, the face, the mouth of the fish determine what those fish are eating, and that can determine, give you the advantage you need as far as deciding what kind of presentation to use. So a lot of it's just all about forage. You know, you've got your invertebrates, you've got your freshwater shrimp, your shiners, your crayfish. I mean, you know, some lakes, these fish are ganging up on crayfish. You know, Leech Lake comes to mind. You look at a Leech Lake fish, you've got a big head, big mouth compared to some of the fish you see in the Dakotas. And one thing that's kind of unique is you talk about Cascade Lake. Cascade is full of perch that are this big. Okay, finding perch on Cascade is easy. Wherever you drill a hole near the old river channel, you're going to have 2 to 3 feet of fish on the bottom everywhere you go that are this big. They're young and weird perch that are just stunted. And it's like a certain percentage of those perch just get big enough to eat, you become cannibalistic. And so a lot of times, like the big perch out there, they're not eating necessarily bugs so much, they're eating the stunted perch. 2-pound perch are eating the 3-inch stunted perch. And so that's kind of a unique thing that we've seen out there. Now we talk about the shape of the head, the shape of the mouth. Okay, that tells you a lot. It tells you a lot of what you need to know. The shape of the school is really all you need to know. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? You can tell by how those fish swim together and how that school is shaped. It's going to tell you exactly what you're dealing with and how you need to attack. Okay. There are some places where the fish will swim around almost in a column. So there might be 20 fish, 30 fish together, and they stack on top of one another, and it's almost like a barrel of fish that are moving around through an area. Okay. When you encounter that type of a situation where fish are schooling in a column, you need to attack. Okay? You need to drill. If you finally get on the fish, you're going to catch a lot of fish in a very short amount of time, and then they're going to leave you just as quickly as you found them. And the whole deal with that is managing that school, getting back down as fast as you can, and not messing around, because those fish aren't going to wait for you. And then when you lose them, you're going to have to drill until you find them again. And so those types of situations, Ponset Lake comes to mind in eastern South Dakota, where the fish, when you find them, you don't find one, you find 10, you find 20, you find 30, okay? And they're almost always on top of one another. And whenever you get situations where perch are on top of one another, they're a lot more aggressive, way more aggressive. When you see 4 or 5, 6, 7 fish on your Vexlar, and they're rising up, they're rising through you, those fish make you look good, okay? And so sometimes you can try to create that, okay? You can change the shape of the school as well. We'll talk about that. It's all about competition. One fish can be really tough to catch when there's a lot for that fish to eat. That same fish can have a complete attitude adjustment when fish number 2 and fish number 3 shows up. Does that make sense? Fish can be kind of tough. Another fish comes in, second fish comes in, maybe one fish lifts a little bit, that raises a third fish. All of a sudden they start to compete against each other. Competition has a big bearing, huge bearing on the temperament of the fish. Okay? When you don't have competition, you have fish that are way, way harder to catch. Okay? Competition makes you look good as an angler. And obviously, you know your fish density. When you have a lot of fish, you have more competition. When you don't have many fish and there's not a lot of competition, those fish are a lot harder to catch. And obviously, the forage density has a whole bearing in that too. You'll see ebbs and flows in that as well. Some lakes, I can think of some lakes back home where they have a reputation as being a camera lake. Oh, it's like pulling your hair out trying to catch fish. So we call it a brain surgery bite. It's like whatever you do, the fish don't like. And so you almost have to put a camera down and watch the fish come in. They'll just barely kiss it, they'll touch it, back up, suck on it, spit it. And you set the hook by watching them with a camera. If you didn't have a camera, you'd pull your hair out, you'd have a really hard time catching them. We have lakes like that. Okay. What's interesting is it's almost driven by too much for the fish to eat. So then what happens, the lake drops 2 or 3 feet in the dry summer. You don't have all those invertebrates in the lake. And that same lake of 3 years ago, you saw you had an underwater camera to catch fish. Now all of a sudden it's like a completely different personality change. Where those lakes all of a sudden become easier again because there's a couple more year classes of fish, some more reproductive effort, less for the fish to eat, and those same fish that were giving you a hard time make you look a lot better. And so you'll see ebbs and flows. So we talked about the call. The next thing is very common you see is where basically you have perch swimming basically off the bottom or near the bottom, and they're swimming side by side. Those fish can be aggressive. They cannot be aggressive at times. But if there's one thing you can do to tip the odds in your favor, is get those fish to stack on top of one another. So you have 7 fish, and they're all swimming side by side. You get one fish to come up. If you can't get that fish to eat, just keep that fish around and see if you can bring that fish up for the sole purpose of bringing in that second fish. Okay. I think sometimes people get too impatient. They get a fish that's giving them problems. Is if you can't catch that fish that's right on you, don't necessarily think you're going to give up on that fish. Keep that fish up around to keep them high long enough for another fish to show up. Because that's going to help your cause dramatically. And if you get number 3 to show up, one of them is going to eat. And so that's something to consider is when those fish are swimming side by side, try to see if you can pull them up, get them up, 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 up. You get more fish to come up, and when you basically change the shape of that school. That's the easiest way to give them an attitude adjustment when they're pulling your hair out and having a hard time getting these fish to trigger. And so shape of the school is as important as shape of the mouth. Call them, you have to find it. Once you find those fish, you're going to catch them. When fish spread out, and they're fishing side by side, they can be a lot tougher to catch. And so if you can, try to get those fish to come underneath you and come up. Let's talk about those aggressive bites. We call them, fishing the column. When you're dealing with aggressive fish, there's things to do and there's things you don't want to do. What I look at it is, a lot of it's, you're not dealing with live bait. Okay, I don't want to use a wiggler. I don't want to use a minnow head. A lot of times I'm using soft plastics and you're fishing without bait because it takes time. Okay, when you're fishing the column, it's all about getting back down. When you're dropping down, you see those fish coming up. I mean, sometimes they get so intense that those fish are on before you can physically close your bail and set the hook. So a lot of times it's single hooks. I don't want to deal with a treble hook. Why? Because it takes longer to unhook. My biggest fear isn't getting the fish to bite. The fish is going to bite whatever I put down there. My biggest fear is when I get that fish on my lap or flopping on the ice that I can't unhook it fast enough and get back down. And so everything as far as choosing your presentation, choosing your tackle, choosing your strategy is about rapid fire, getting back down to the fish as fast as you can. And so a lot of times it is a single hook. A lot of times it's a single hook attached to a lure where I can use that lure to pop the hook out. Okay, a lot of times I'm using lures that do not have a split ring, just so I can pop it out faster. And not only am I using a single hook, I'm using something that'll fish fast and get back down fast. Now, say if you're on Saginaw Bay in 5 feet of water, it could be a flutter spoon. It's got a hook welded to it called a bead spoon. Mille Lacs in 8 feet of water, you can get away with flutter spoons because you're not dealing with a lot of depth. But you're trying to get something that gets back down to the fish very, very quickly. Okay. Usually I'm going to pinch out the barbs. Okay. Pinch down the barb just so I can unhook that fish faster. I don't want to be dealing with small hooks. I don't want to be dealing with small barbs. I don't want to be dealing with anything that I'm going to have to use a forceps for to unhook that fish. I want to be able to pop that hook back out and get back down. And a lot of times I like to bend out the hook. Okay, even if it's on, say, a jig or a single hook spoon, is I'll just bend that hook out so that way I can get those fish to pop off when they hit the ice so I can get back down. Okay, so just a couple of modifications you can do on the good bites. And as a rule of thumb, fish high. Okay, make those fish come up to you. And you get those fish to come up. And usually the higher you get those fish to come up in the water column, the easier they are to catch. Okay, those fish make them look good. Go ahead and change it. Let's talk about the brain surgery bites. I mean, this is the complete opposite. Okay, now don't think that one is better than the other. Some of these tough bites can be great, but you just have to have the right mentality. You have to have the right strategy. Okay, for just to wrap your head around it. That bite we just described, that's zero to hero stuff. Where you can be drilling 50 holes, 70 holes, 100 holes, and just beating your head against the wall and not finding fish and not seeing a single fish, and all of a sudden 15 minutes later the whole world can be different. Where you can caught 30 fish in 15 minutes. You go from zero to hero in those type of situations. The brain surgery advice when things are tougher, you have those high forage densities, tougher fish to trigger, you have to grind on them more. Where you might not move as much, you try to stay on top of fish, you try to ride the wave, try to ride the flow of fish, or you're just trying to roll up your sleeve and you're just waiting out those bite windows. Where like back home on Devil's Lake, it's really common in that deep water, fish 40, 50, 60 feet of water sometimes. And you're getting that flow of fish, and you're marking fish every 10 minutes. And you might catch one fish an hour, and the fish come up, they drop down, they come up, they drop down. You're just pulling your hair out, but then you get that one window during the day where the sun gets just the right angle, you get the right light penetration, where you catch 7 in an hour. You just have to sometimes stay with it. You have to stay with it and be a little patient with some of these tougher bites. It's easy to leave fish, thinking that they got to be biting great somewhere else. A lot of times when I find those type of situations that create those bites, they're not. You just have to learn how to fish those type of fish. And so a couple of things. Deep water adjustments. Bigger is better in the sense that you need to straighten out the memory in your line. But at the same time, a lot of times it is small profiles. And so a lot of things like pencil weights, they're big out. Anybody from Wisconsin, Mendota, Madison chain? Okay, the pencil weights are big out, and that's where we saw them first. The guys who come to Devil's Lake with the pencil weights. Pencil weights, where you have basically a long weights. Sometimes people you made them out of welding rods. There's different things you can make them out of. You have the long weight, and then you've got the line or the chain below it, and that weight is just like a dart where you just use it to get down into deep water. You might be fishing, say, 50, 60 feet of water at times. Just a way to get down fast. A simpler version is just a dropper spoon. Take your favorite spoon, put a chain, like a clam makes one called a speed spoon, and just drops like a dart. But spoons with droppers or chains, Haley is another one. You got the Haley chain, you got a spoon, you got the dropper. The spoon, it just gets that presentation down fast. And obviously, in today's world with the tungsten jigs are where it's at for deep perch. There's the sensitivity in just being able to fish that small profile in such deep water. There's a drop, it's called the Drop 2XL, which is my favorite, where you got the bigger tungsten head. That 2XL is just a bigger wide gap hook. I like to use the bigger hooks on perch. I feel like you can use too small hooks on perch. You get a 14, 15-inch perch. They do have a big mouth. If you're using a perch eye, a minnow head, say 2 or 3 wax worms, you want to have a wide gap. That makes a big difference, especially in deep water. In deep water, a lot of times we're fishing deep water basins, whether it's say Bitter Lake or Devil's Lake, even Madison Chain, if you're fishing 40 feet of water, don't hesitate to use braided line. Okay, you look at like a 6-pound cross braid is very, very thin diameter. Even the 8-pound diameter is very thin. When you get in that deeper water, that makes a big difference on your hook set and your sensitivity. Back home on Devil's Lake, it's hard to use underwater cameras when you're in 40 feet of water. Just the water's too stained, there's just not enough light penetration. Usually we've got snow up to our knees, and it's just really hard to see. But every once in a while, I can see. Okay, not every day can I use an underwater camera in 40 feet of water, but there's been times where I've been able to. And here's what's shocking. A fish will come up and they'll grab the presentation. If you're missing a lot of fish, a lot of times it's because they're grabbing the presentation from the wrong end. So they're grabbing the end with the bait, they're grabbing the lead jig end. Okay, and that's one thing I've noticed just by watching fish on a camera. But here's what's also shocking is they grab it, they suck onto it. A lot of times they suck onto it again, they take a second suck. When they push forward, that's when you get anything on your rod tip. Okay, when you're in 40 feet of water, I just saw when a fish sucked in your bait, you have some, you feel it, you see it, you have some notification, right? It's shocking how much a fish has to do and how far it has to go when you're 40 feet of water. Fish sucks it in, you get a couple of gulps, and they got to go about this far before you see anything on a spring hook, before you feel anything on a rod. I don't care what kind of rod you have. Okay, And I think that's one of the reasons why, like back home on Devil's Lake in that deep water, why live bait, whether it was soft plastics, perch eyes, some type of meat was so important. Where we never caught fish as good on soft plastics in Devil's Lake and as a deep perch as some other bodies of water. Okay, and I think that's why, because when the fish have to go that far before you see bite indication, it's easier for them to do that if there's meat in their mouth. Okay, soft plastics, they're not going to suck that in and swim around with it for the rest of the day. They're going to spit it out. Okay, and so just a couple of observations: when you get in that deep water, they are harder to catch by deep water. And that's why the competition thing can be so important. I remember years ago where I was struggling to catch fish. Fish are hitting the wrong end of the jig. I could finally see them on the camera. I'll just pull my hair out trying to catch them because the fish are coming in one at a time. There's no competition. I couldn't get the fish to rise up in the water column. And the biggest thing is, like you watch these fish on the camera, they would suck in the jig and they wouldn't coast ahead. Like when you get that nice hard boom, and just that nice hard bite that just drops that rod tip. And if you can ever get a chance to watch these fish on the camera, a lot of times what it is, there's four of them there. One of them goes ahead of the rest of them, and then that bait fish has that bait in its mouth, and the rest of them are like looking at that fish, and then that fish swims away to get away from all the rest of the fish. That's what gives you that good hard bite, is the fish grabbing it and moving, and usually it's made more intense or better if there's other fish around. Okay, that come back to that competition. Okay, one of the toughest things ever is in deep water, especially these perch, is they grab it, and then they back up. They spit, they grab it again, but they don't grab it and go anywhere. They don't grab it, swallow it, and swim away. When you get those type of bites, that's one of the toughest bites, especially in 40 feet of water. And if you ever get that type of a situation with there's bluegills, crappies, especially with big perch, what you do is take your jig, put maybe one wax worm on, slide a tiny, tiny treble hook or this on the shank of your jig, and just let it dangle. Then put one more wax worm over the top, and you'll snag them. You'll snag a lot of fish in the face that way that don't give you any type of a bite indication. Okay, most days if you catch them in front of the eye, it's fair game. Okay, but just a couple of things, adjustments you can make for these tougher brain surgery bites. Make sure that you're in a situation where you can watch the bite. Sometimes you can feel it on part of the good graphite rod, but day in and day out, I feel like if you can watch that rod tip, like on a sanded glass type rod, like a Beat Stick series or Dead Beat series, watching that bite is a lot easier on those deep fish that are just tough to catch. It's easier to see than feel. Manage the spin. If your line is all twisted up on these tougher bites, you will not catch fish. If your line is twisted up, if your lure is just helicoptering, you aren't going to catch nearly as much. Now you can still move it aggressively and catch fish that way with twisted line, but a lot of times with these tougher fish, it almost turns into we call a managed, modified dead stick approach, in the sense that you might quiver it to bring fish in, and then once you bring them in, a lot of it's just holding it, lifting it, but you're doing a lot less. And as you do less with that presentation, if your line is twisted, you're going to get spin. And so manage that. Talk about using that braided line in deep water. I like using a tiny little swivel, say 3-4 feet above my lure, 2 feet above my lure. And a lot of times I just use a fluorocarbon leader, just make that invisible. I don't think it matters in some bodies of water. Some places it matters, some places it don't. But what does matter is having that tiny swivel above your presentation, so you're not working up so much twist in your line. Okay, it's just going to make your presentation hang better. I don't do that as much like with bluegills and stuff, because I find that bluegills will sometimes spend a lot of time trying to figure out what your swivel is. Does that make sense? Bluegills will go up and try to eat the swivel. Perch, not so much. When we're using lures, spoons, some of the smaller glide baits for perch, don't be afraid to get that swivel above and manage that line twist, because a lot of times you got to catch these fish by doing less. And if your lure's spinning a lot, you're not going to catch as much. And remember that these bites are often invertebrate driven. Okay, you got an invertebrate with maybe it's got a tail, maybe it's got legs or whatever, but there's no evasive maneuvers. They swim in a line. Back swimmers, freshwater shrimp, they can't get away. They just swim in a line, and so when you're trying to use your presentation, You know, a lot of times it's much more bug-like. You're just kicking, you're just trying to make something look alive. Even if you're just using, say, a soft plastic on a tungsten jig, is, you know, in an area where the fish are eating a lot of mayfly larvae, wigglers, you're just trying to make something that looks alive. Okay? When you get situations where fish are attacking crayfish, shiners, young lure fish, it's a lot more ripping, and you're working that lure a lot more aggressively because you can make it appear like a fish that's trying to get away. That makes sense? You know, people talk about matching the hatch. Sometimes that can be overrated, but there is something to it with perch fishing where you want to try to fall into what these fish are used to doing. And so, small profiles are often the ticket. You know, small tungsten jigs, small profiles when you're on those bug-driven lakes. And the last thing, okay, one of the best things ever when fish are really, really, really tough and they're pulling their hair out. I don't care if you're on Kagitic or if you're on Devil's Lake. There's a plain hook and a split shot on Kagitic. It would be a wiggler. Anybody ever use wigglers? Just basically, some people call them thunder bugs, different names for them. Wisconsin is big. Basically, it's a dragonfly larva. They're kind of a hideous looking thing about that big. Okay, if you don't change the water on it, they smell terrible, stinky, gross, brown water. Okay, basically it's a dragonfly larva that you're nicking a lot of times with a plain hook. You're just letting that dragonfly larva swim around next to the bottom. Okay, that's what they're doing on Lake Kagitic to catch a lot of big perch. Just run those wigglers right next to the bottom. Okay, Devil's Lake, we don't have the wigglers, but what we are doing is something very similar. We're just using a plain hook split shot. It is a tiny fathead minnow. Okay, but there's a lot of times and a lot of places where it's peculiar how you have a hard time catching fish jigging any type of a lure, but you can catch them on a dead stick. Okay, it's peculiar that way. Where if you're trying all these different things and you just cannot get fish to come in and seem interested on anything that you're doing, don't overthink this. Okay, we always joke that we don't tell everybody how good a plain hook and a split shot works at times. Okay, when nothing else will work, that is like the last line of defense, where it's peculiar how well that will work when nothing else works. Okay, and so you might be as a dead stick on Devil's Lake, you might be setting tiny, small, fatted minnows you can find on a plain hook, forages right off the bottom. On Kagitic, it might be wigglers right off the bottom, but when you get on those really tough bites, or doesn't know anything wants to work, go with, you know, the dead stick. That could be a big thing. A couple more attitude adjustments. These can be kind of important. So we kind of talked about stacking multiple fish. You get one fish to show up. You get 2 or 3, 4 more fish to show up. And how much the attitude of those fish change. They get easier to catch. You get the competition. You get that fish in a better mood. The higher you get that fish. Maybe it's a deal where there's a couple things happening when you can lift fish up off the bottom. If there's 4 or 5 fish in a race to get to your bait, usually the biggest fish with the biggest tail wins. And so by default, you have a tendency to sort out the bigger fish if they're all trying to get to it with the same amount of effort. The other thing is when you get fish to come up off the bottom, or if you get them to rise in the water column, the higher they get, it's like the more uncomfortable they get. Okay, they want to be back with their buddies. Okay, if I've got 15 perch back here, I don't want to leave my pack. I don't want to leave my buddies, because when I'm all by myself out there, it's like finding Nemo. All by yourself in the abyss, you're food for something. Okay, and so a lot of times you'll see, and it's panfish in general, where if they're on the bottom, they don't want to leave the bottom. And you can tell how big of a fish it is by how comfortable it is to be on the bottom. Little fish. What do little fish do? They come up and then they dart right back down. They cannot wait to get back down to the bottom. Why? Because it gives them the heebie-jeebies being 3 feet above everything else. Big fish are a lot more confident. Big fish don't have any problem leaving the bottom. And so that's the other thing to consider is, you know, as far as rising, getting fish to rise in the water column, a lot of times you're going to catch your bigger fish that way. Here's something to do at times. What we call lifting fish, but also trying to get multiple fish up. When you stick a fish on some of your tougher bites, it's just like the fish are in a little bit of a funk. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll hook onto a fish, you know, assuming that, you know, say I'm in 20 feet of water, 15 feet of water, hook up to a fish, just give it 1, 2, 3 cranks, get them up above the pack, get them up off the bottom, and just let them dig around a little bit. Sometimes they get off, okay? But usually what they do is they get things going, okay? What I'm looking at is I'm looking at the response, okay? You stick a fish, you bring it up 3-4 feet, and just let that fish swim around and dig. If you get 3-4 more fish that just come up to it, come up to the same level as that fish that's on the line, as soon as you get that fish up and get back down, those other fish will hit. So use that fish sometimes to pull other fish up higher. Okay, the most powerful decoy to risk for perch is another perch. Okay, you can even say that about crappies and bluegills at times. This isn't just a perch thing, this can work with other species, but it's really, really deadly with perch. Stick that fish, bring it up a little bit, and just let that fish dig and see what the rest of those fish do. How many fish show up with that fish that you've got on your line? If you see fish starting to show up, get that fish up and get right back down. But sometimes you can just change the attitude. It's like the first fish you're just pulling your hair out. It's impossible to catch. You finally get it to bite. Sometimes it's like flicking the switch, and you just get those fish in a much better mood by just getting them up off the bottom and just letting that fish fight around. Let that fish swim around in a couple circles. Okay, again, sometimes they'll get off, but what I find is the damage is worth what you do to the attitude of that school of fish. Okay, and so a couple of things to consider. The other thing is, sometimes you do have to wait out feeding windows. Okay, you never say always or never with fishing. Sometimes with really clear water, you're waiting for sunset. All your fish come within a 45-minute window when the sun hits the trees. It's all about morning and evening. Other lakes, maybe you have a little bit of stain in the water, whatever. It's all about sunshine. It's really hard to catch perch from some lakes when it's cloudy. They just seem to move so much better and seem so much more aggressive when it's sunny. Our deep perch, for example, on Devil's Lake, if it's like low ceiling, foggy, cloudy, I don't even try to catch those fish in 40, 50, 55 feet of water. I've never seen where the fishing is good in that deep of water with cloudy conditions and stained water. Okay, but I'll spend all my time in less than 15 feet of water just trying to target the shallow fish. Okay, but sometimes, especially on these lakes that have a lot of invertebrates, Gibbon comes to mind, Devil's Lake, lakes are just lots of bugs to eat. Wait on those windows. Okay, these fish aren't going to bite all day. They're going to bite in this periods of time. So if you're on fish, if you're on the right fish, be patient, be methodical. Okay, sometimes you just got to slow down. And the other thing to consider as well is that when you wait out these windows, you're also, I think sometimes people try to think of too much. Think of perch, aggressive fish. Things that create big fish work against you with aggressiveness. That makes sense? If most of your fishing for perch has been for stunted fish, where I can think of lakes where they're full of 3 to 5 inch fish, full of them. Wherever you go, you drill a hole and there's 7 feet of them. Those fish, those perch, that history isn't doing you any good as far as catching big perch. That makes sense? Because they're so stunted, they're so aggressive. The situations, the conditions, the factors that make a lake produce 12 inch, 14 inch, 16 inch perch are completely different. Those factors are working against you. There's a few clear water adjustments because sometimes we do find fish in extremely clear water, and that does have a bearing and an effect on how we fish. If you're ever fishing clear water, don't hesitate to fish really high. Get above the fish. What's considered high in 20, 30 feet of water? If you can see down, you see down 12 feet, don't be afraid to get above, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet above where you anticipate those fish coming. Okay? Get above the fish, that way the fish can see it from a lot further away. Because again, when you're trying to catch fish a lot of times, you're not just trying to find the fish, you're fishing so the fish can find you. And fishing high enables those fish to find you from a lot further. So whenever you're in clear water, make sure you fish high. The other thing too is that I've seen a lot of places, Wabae Lake in South Dakota used to be this way years ago, where some years Wabae Lake would get really clear. And where you can catch a perch in 12 feet of water, but you can see down in 10 feet, and the water is really clear. In those types of situations as well, we have to really focus on sunset, low light conditions to catch fish. It's a deal where you just pull your hair out all day to catch fish. That last hour is when they really roll through. It's almost like you're a walleye fish. Okay, clear water. Don't be afraid to focus on sunset, and also too, it seems like clear water, flash, a lot more flash, holographic colors, silver, chrome, gold. Something that's got some silver, some kind of foil flash on it is a big thing with perch in clear water, especially with high suns. Go ahead and change it. And we'll wrap up here with resources. And also, too, if you have any questions you know, I'll be here all weekend. And so love talking fish, whether you have questions on Devil's Lake, perch fishing, or some of the places we've been. But make sure you take advantage of the resources that are out there. The learning curve is so dramatically fast in today's world. Okay, if you've never gone anywhere, look up YouTube videos. You've never been to Cascade, for example? Just look up YouTube videos. You've never been to Devil's Lake? Look up YouTube videos. You can find a lot about a fishery by just seeing what other people have done in that body of water. Okay? I've got North Dakota Game and Fish, back over Minnesota, DNR's got something called Lake Fighter, which is excellent. South Dakota's got version. Each state agency does really a phenomenal job, at least in the upper Midwest here, as far as showing you what's out there. You look at lake surveys, you look at population dynamics, stocking surveys, you find out a lot of information on some of these state agency websites. So definitely take advantage of them. Apps like virtual angling, okay? I mean, it's basically like coaching for fishing, okay? Where you can get information on presentations, timely information on some of the patterns that are happening. Again, it speeds up the learning curve dramatically. Onyx Fish is a tremendous app. A lot of the stuff you just put right on your phone. I don't know how many of you use Onyx for hunting. You do a lot of hunting, it's a must-have. Okay, they've got an Apple CarPlay feature. You have your Onyx fishing app up. You got a lake map right on the dash of your car, which is kind of handy. Are the lakes as good as say Lake Master? No, but the lake maps are pretty good. Contours are pretty good, but it's right on your car. So if you're trying to get off the lake and you're trying to find a point, you can get close. Okay, so that's pretty handy. It's also got a feature where you can look up aerial photography, aerial imagery from the last year. And so you can look and see where people were fishing the year prior on the lake. That's pretty useful. Okay. You can look and see when the lake freezes up. You can see what lake freezes up and what lakes aren't freezing up, whether it's early ice or late ice. So there's a lot of things with Onyx Fish app that are useful. And obviously, with some of this stuff, I always joke, be careful who you tell. Okay? If fishing doesn't get better when too many people start fishing the same way, right? Like we always joke that when we film a show, if it's a big lake like Mille Lacs, Leech Lake, whatever, we'll tell you what lake we're on. We like to see people catch fish. But if we're on a small lake, say 1,000 acres, 500 acres, 300 acres, 30 acres, we just tell you the county that we're in. Because the reality is there's all kinds of lakes that are similar that you can apply this pattern to find your own fish. Okay? So it's important to be the fish hunter. I think sometimes what happens is people, we've gotten so in tune to networking that we rely on the network too much. Okay? If you're relying on that network too much, you're never going to experience great fishing because you're always picking up scraps. By the time you hear about it, by the time you find out about it, it's too late. It's too late. And so some of us, you have to be your own hunter. You have to find your own fish. Okay? If you can do that, you're gonna see some of the best fish in the body of water. That's the only way there is to it. I wish there was a better way. I wish there was something I could sell you, something I could tell you, but there isn't. Okay? Be the hunter and don't be afraid to fail. That's the other thing that we see is that some of the people that get on the very best bites, they're not afraid of striking out. They'll try 4 or 5 lakes just to see. Okay? And lake number 6 is where it's at. Okay? Some people are scared to try things that don't work. And so then you end up going back to the well. And going back to what you think should work and knows what does work. But obviously sometimes that isn't the best bite on the lake. Okay? And so use the different resources that are out there. Be the fish hunter. Try to find the fish. Try to find your own fish whenever you can. And that's a big part of this. No matter where you go, no matter what you fish for. Okay? Any questions at all?